And welcome to NAMI Tennessee Facebook Live. We do this every Monday, so if you've been here for a long time, you know that we do it every Monday at 2 Central, 3 Eastern. Even if I'm not available, we have a rerun. So every single Monday, you can count on us. We're going to have some announcements before we get started and get to our super cool guest. We're going to tell you about the virtual NAMI Tennessee Conference, September 23rd and 24th. You can learn more at NAMITN.org. The next thing that I cover week after week, so all of you should already be signed up, is join NAMI Tennessee's email list. People are always emailing us like, we didn't know the basics class started. We didn't know that Family to Family started. We didn't know we were doing this advocacy thing. We didn't know there were Facebook Lives. How do we keep up with all the really cool things that NAMI Tennessee does? We have a solution to that, and it's right there. It's the NAMI Tennessee email list. So please head over to NAMITN.org, sign up for that, and then you won't miss a thing. And last but certainly not least, we're going to be talking about NAMI Basics. You can learn more at NAMITN.org/NAMI-Basics. It's also in the comments. There's a little link right there. As the show goes on, I will flash this on the screen so you can learn all about NAMI Basics. Super important for those of you with children who have mental illness. For all of our parents out there. All right, well, that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and bring on our super cool guest. Welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourselves? Tell everybody why you're here.
All right, thank you. My name is Suzanne Stratton, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And I'm also the president of KSebastian, which is the Tennessee Association of School Social Workers. So I'm here today to talk about school social work and schools.
Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for being here. Let's start all the way at the beginning. Just the most basic question that I could find sincerely. Let's define our terms. What are school social workers and how do they differ from other social workers? And then, of course, when you talk about how they differ, what do those social workers do?
Right. Well, social workers are mental health professionals, so they have mental health training. And in the school system, they can be bachelor's level, master's level, licensed clinical social workers. And they provide a myriad of services, everything from basic generalist social work all the way to therapeutic services, depending upon their level of education and the requirements of the school system. So you see kind of a wide range of social workers. A lot of times when people think social worker, they think DCS, they think home visits. School social workers do home visits, but that's not, their primary role is not the same as they're not investigating child abuse like a DCS social worker would be. So that's kind of who your social workers are in a nutshell.
And then the school social worker obviously is the one that works in the school. So you work with a lot of children. Is that correct?
Yes, we do everything from preschool all the way through high school. So you will see that. And now even some school social workers are being hired at the college level. So you're starting to see some social workers go into the college arena. But school social workers in general, when we talk about school social workers in the state of Tennessee, we're mainly talking about pre-K through 12th grade.
Very cool. Now let's talk about the roles of school social workers. What do you? I mean, you're in the school. Obviously, you're providing services to children, but what do you do?
Well, like I said, we're kind of a jack of all trades. We do a lot. Different schools have different needs, and so they have different requests of their school social workers, and different districts do as well. But you'll see social workers providing everything, like I said, from home visits to clinical assessments. So some are doing psychosocial assessments. They're providing therapy. Some are doing truancy. Some are doing things like habit. Most are sitting in on IEPs. They're working with special ed students. A lot of them are sitting in special ed assessments, mental health assessments. They also are trying to reduce barriers. So you'll see a whole lot of assessment going on, even in a generalist practice, of trying to help families figure out what their needs are and trying to help them meet those needs with community resources. They also do crisis management. So you're going to see social workers doing suicide assessments, threat assessments, things like that in the school system. And then you're also going to see case management services where we're going to work with families, just like I said, to work on everything from parenting skills to behavior management. We do positive behavior interventions, so you'll see some of that. We work on ethical issues sometimes, and when the school and the family can't come to an agreement, sometimes we help to navigate that. process because we're kind of the link between the schools, the families, and the students. Obviously, the whole purpose is to try to get a better school environment and experience and a better learning opportunity for the students.
One of the things that you said was that you were sort of a jack of all trades and that you do all kinds of things. And I know in our little pre-interview before we got started, you said that many people don't realize you're the school social worker. They think that you're the dog lady. Can
Right.
you talk about that? Because, I mean, pets are
Right.
very, very helpful, especially getting children to talk.
Yes, we have the human animal bond in Tennessee, or otherwise known as Habit, is something that I'm in the East Tennessee area, so that's something that a lot of school social workers provide that service within the schools. So we often take dogs, some take cats, rabbits into the school setting and work with kids who are grieving or going through loss. We do groups to help them navigate some of those emotions and those feelings. Sometimes we use the dog. Maybe if a kid gets in a fight at school and is too upset to tell their side of the story, or some big tragedy happens, a lot of times we'll bring the dog in. Or sometimes it's as simple as we want kids to be able to pet the dog and stuff before they take a big exam so that their stress level goes down before they have to think about the academic side of things. So we use the dogs and cats and any of the animals really that are habit trained in that capacity. So in my schools, I have a dog. And so, like I said, sometimes I get to refer to as the dog lady or that woman with the dog. But that's okay. That is a label I wear proudly. So it's great.
I think that is incredible, and it's not surprising. I think you'd be hard pressed to find many adults that don't see value in maybe not animal ownership, but even the most stubborn, curmudgeonly person I know, who is my father, likes to pet my dog for a
Right.
few minutes. He wears it, but he'll throw the ball for a couple of minutes and admits that okay, he's a dog, but keep him out of my house. So I think that the benefits are well established.
I usually take the dog also into a lot of the special ed classrooms, and that's really great because um, a lot of those students kind of miss out on some of the mainstream things, but taking the dog to them gives them kind of a special moment of a friend coming to visit just them, and they really enjoy that. So I think there's benefit to that at all levels, from kids with some extreme disabilities all the way up to, really and truthfully, I think the staff benefit as much or more even than the students do. I can't tell you how many staff can't wait until the habit day and want me to make sure that I stop in the office first, or bring them to the principals. So it helps everyone in the school system. And the last little bit has been stressful for the last couple of years. So it's been a big help.
Very, very true. Now, one of the things I was thinking about is, Tennessee is a big state. Do all school systems have school social workers? And what's the ratio? Are you the only one for an entire school system? Is there one per school? I imagine there's some variance.
Right. There is the NASW, the National Association of School Social Workers, has asked that the ratio be one school social worker per every 250 students. That is sadly not the case. We've done a lot of legislative things this year trying to get that ratio lowered. Currently, the ratio is like 1 to 2,000. I think the legislation that was up this past year was 1 to 1,000 to try to lower that. But there are like 40% of the school systems in Tennessee that don't have a school social worker yet. That was even higher last year, but it has lowered as we've gone through this pandemic, and schools have seen the need for school social workers rise and grow. And so they want that particular staff person in their building. So that has changed. And we're still trying to combat legislatively to get more funding so that happens. There's this nice little clause, as you see a lot of times that happens when legislation goes down, that's at the end of it says as budget allows. And so school systems, as they're constantly fighting over dollars, sometimes when the budget doesn't allow, or they don't really see or know the need of that. But school systems that have school social workers are constantly adding school social workers, more and more of them, to their system as they see that value. So I think a lot of school systems, if you don't have a school social worker, they try to utilize a school counselor in some of those same roles. So if you're in a system that doesn't have a school social worker, obviously I'd love for you to legislate for one or ask for one with some advocacy. But at the same time, if you don't have one, that doesn't mean you're without services, without help. You can go to your school counselor and ask for the same types of services. And within a realm, you'll get close to the same services.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Now, I've asked a lot of questions about what social workers are, what do they do, and how can they help. And now, finally, one that will benefit you in the best way possible. I sincerely hope. What do social workers want all the parents to know?
Oh, well, that's a big one. I really think the best thing that we can say to parents is that if you have a child who has unmet emotional or physical needs, they're going to have trouble learning and they're going to struggle in school and to adjust to that school environment. And the role for us is to try to help remove some of those barriers for students so they can be as successful as as possible in the academic arena and the social arena. So if you have a student that you feel like, or you have a child who you feel like is maybe struggling with things academically, you feel like they're struggling with things socially, you're worried about them in any way, I would say make sure and tell your school social worker, because we don't sometimes know if you don't tell us what you need. And we are definitely there to help. I mean, we have lots of resources available within the school system, and we have lots of resources available to us as school social workers. So ask, and you can get those services. And your school social worker, if they don't know, they will find a way to link you with the services that you need. That's kind of our key role. So we will make sure and try to do everything we can to reduce the barriers for your child to be successful in school.
That is fantastic. Now, this is sort of a follow-up question to that. Parents want the best for their children. And I imagine that there are disagreements that arise because social workers want the best for their children as well. And sometimes I'm going to go with you butt heads, but in the best possible way. What would you like parents to know in that situation when I don't even want to call it a disagreement because everybody's fighting so we're all on the same side fighting for the children. But, even parents, they disagree. I mean, my dad used to fight with my grandma all the time about how to raise me, and I turned out okay. So I think these disagreements are good. But what would you like parents to know on how to handle those difficulties? And what would you like other social workers to know?
Well, I think a lot of times you'll find out that they don't have too many disagreements with a social worker unless you're talking about something that is going to cause them some kind of discomfort. And usually social workers are trained to handle that. We're trained to sort of diffuse anger. We're trained to kind of be that mediator. So a lot of times you'll see the social workers pulled in maybe when the disagreement is between a principal or administration in a family, or maybe they don't agree with an assessment that's been done. So maybe the disagreement is between the school psychologist and the family member. And so what I think for the most part happens is social workers become the mediator, because we're kind of, like I said before, that link between the school system and the family and the student. And I think everybody wants the same thing. So coming to a common ground usually always happens as long as everybody comes to the table and has communication, and that communication is open and respectful, going both ways. We try really hard to make it as easy for a parent as possible, but sometimes we have to talk about things that are really tough for parents to hear. And sometimes, when we say them out loud, that means we have to deal with them, and that makes them real, where we can't be ostrich head in the sand sort of mentality anymore. And I think I would say that is probably the hardest thing for parents, is not so much that they disagree with what the school system's doing, but nobody wants to hear about the struggles that their child is going through. I mean, as a parent, I don't want my child to struggle. And it's hard for me sometimes to hear things that she's going through, because as a parent, you want to fix it, you want to take it away. And some of these things are hard. I mean, when you're talking about things like mental illness, it's tough. Or when you're talking about learning disabilities, it's tough. So I think really, I haven't seen very many disagreements that haven't been able to be worked out between a social worker and a parent. I think usually, like I said, we're brought in to be the mediator, because schools are going at it from an academic purpose, because that's what their focus is. And parents are coming at it from, the love of a child, because that's their focus. And so sometimes we have to kind of bridge that gap. And your social worker is instrumental in that.
Very, very cool. Thank you so much. Let's do a little transition and talk about COVID. I think that social workers are probably working overtime when it comes to COVID. What has been the impact of COVID on individuals, school systems, communities, children, both positive and negative? This is probably the biggest question that I can ask, considering it's really consuming all of our lives right now.
Right. I think starting with sort of like the negatives, because to be quite honest, the negatives are the things we hear the most about, right? I mean, the news, you can't really escape it. You can't get away from it. We've seen a lot of increase in anxiety and depression in students, in parents, in staff. So I think would have to say that probably the biggest negative has been that. You see a huge increase in social isolation. We've seen a huge increase in our suicide assessments. I can't tell you how much suicide assessments have increased, which is frightening. We've seen decreased student attendance, decreased student performance because they're not coming to school. They're not doing virtual well. Some kids, are really struggling with that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of decrease in that academic progression and decrease in some of our community resources. I mean, we've lost some very vital agencies that provided some great and wonderful things to our kids. But out of that, you also have to look at the positives. And one of the things that we've noticed is we've had a huge increase in our charitable donations at the schools. People are digging in their own closets. People are digging in their own pockets. People are coming wanting to volunteer, which we've had to, try to coordinate that with all the COVID issues. We've gotten, free internet access. We've gotten more food. We've finally gotten some debt relief and some rent assistance for some of our families that we've never had before. So there have been some positive things that have gone through that as well. Plus, I think we started to notice a shift in the school system that we need to look more at the social emotional components of children. We've always known that. Social workers have always known that. Your school counselors have always known that. But I think this last couple of years have just really driven that home to the powers that be who are funding things. So I think we've started to see an increase in funds to hire more people to help with mental health and behaviors than we've ever had in the past. So I think that's the positive. Also, we've learned how to use technology, right? I mean, look at what we're doing today, right? I mean, we've really grown, and in the school system, we've grown in that capacity too. I mean, doing groups online is a whole new thing for social workers, but we've had to learn how to do that, and we've had to learn how to have all of our family meetings online, and we've had to learn to access tools that we've never had to access before. So I think those things are not going away. So I think we will continue to grow in that arena, and can only help us in the future.
When I think about some of the things, like you said, the negative things make the news. Are school social workers working overtime with things like mask mandates? And it's for or against. There's people on both sides. And I was thinking about what you said about mitigating conflict and sort of helping
Yes.
people understand and get all on the same page. This is the number one thing that we read in the paper. People got in a fight over a mask.
Right.
How is that working out in the school systems?
It's the same. I think, people are people no matter where they are. And regrettably, sometimes that boils over into things from the neighborhood and things from the universe come into the school system. But it's all about relationships, and people go to people that they think they can talk to and that they trust. And so we've had some school social workers who have really been inundated. I know in our area, because that's been a hot topic, with some parents who have been, very upset about teachers not being vaccinated, teachers being vaccinated, teachers wearing masks, teachers not wearing masks, students wearing masks, students not wearing masks. I mean, there's no pleasing everyone. And so we have all of that going on. And then, of course, that's always subject to change. So the people who are complaining about one thing at one point in time, maybe, we got somebody else complaining just the opposite when the system changes the rules and regulations and policies. So we're very limited. And I would say, please be graceful. We're very limited in the school system as to what decisions we make. We're governed by lots of bodies that tell us what to do. So not only do we have the Tennessee Department of Education and the governor and our own mayors and things like that having impact, we also have our own school board, which votes on what they're doing. And you have that system all across the state. So, one school may be doing one thing and another school may be doing something else. And then someone's upset because why isn't this school doing or not doing that? But But honestly, it comes down to we have to do what we're told. And so, again, it's always subject to change, but it's going to keep evolving, regrettably, over the next little bit. And so I would just say, please be graceful. Be graceful with the teachers and the school staff, and the school staff need to be graceful with the families, because it's been tough for everybody. I mean, it's been tough for everybody for a year and a half. And, those who usually get kicked are not those who have the power to make those choices or those decisions.
I really appreciate you saying that. I know that there's a lot that has gone into both the decision, just all the decisions, and of course, there's just so much information out there. There's just so much information out there. I haven't even talked about the misinformation or the half information. It's got a kernel of truth, but maybe it's been exaggerated. It's very difficult for folks to know when it comes to the collective trauma that all of us have over COVID, specifically in families. What are the signs and symptoms of distress that you look for? Because there's, as you said, we've all gone through a lot in the last year and a half. But when do we get worried? I'm trying to honor that everybody has been through a lot, but there's some people who unfortunately have gone through more. How do you, as a social worker, tease out the plain old COVID trauma and unfortunately the extra distress?
Right. I would also say that there's a different level of support that different people need. Some people have more coping skills than others, and so what may affect one, or have experienced trauma beforehand, before all of this started, in different ways, and had different ranges of support that they can fall back on. So it might be that they also, what affects one person one way affects someone else differently. So the main things I think that jump out to me are a serious anxiety. And I don't mean just a little bit like I'm a little bit nervous about doing this, but serious crippling anxiety where I just can't do this. I get frozen. I start having physical symptoms or physical illness from these things. The same with depression. If someone just can't do it, can't get out of bed, can't face that day, or you start noticing that there are things that they used to love, especially kids, like they were always big video game players, and now they're not interested at all in playing video games, or they used to love hanging out with their friends, and now they don't want to hang out with their friends. That change in that pattern of behavior is a big clue. Absenteeism from school is a big issue, a big clue, because it's a change of a pattern and routine. Suicidal ideation, obviously, is something to be very, very cognizant of. Problem behaviors, kids who may never have gotten in trouble are now getting suspended at school, or now getting in fights with their parents at home, or self-esteem issues. Maybe a kid who had a whole lot of self-esteem and now doesn't seem to have a lot of self-esteem. That can be a problem. I think lowered school achievement. If you got a kid who was a straight A kid and now they're bringing home C's and D's, or you had a kid who was bringing home C's and B's and now they're bringing home D's and F's, it's always something to look into. So anytime there's a big change in behavior, I would say you need to bring that to at least to the attention of someone at the school, whether that be the school social worker, the school counselor, the administrator. Someone needs to know that this might need to be looked into a little bit further.
And then when you say looked into a little bit further, what are the steps? For many of us, we know what happens if there's a physical health emergency, but
right.
Surprisingly, very few people know what happens if there is a potential mental health crisis. I won't even go with emergency. We don't even have, we have first aid for a cut, a Band-Aid, we understand, but we don't really have a lot of mental health first aid out there. But social workers, they understand mental health first aid.
Oh, we come running with the Band-Aids, don't we? We have, we start out, of course, by doing an assessment, talking to a student. If you already have a relationship with that student, that's great. That gives you a leg up. If you don't, you start immediately trying to make that relationship with that student. You ask questions and you listen. And those are the two biggest things I would even tell parents. Ask questions and listen to the answers. A lot of times students, once they get past the initial nothing, or it doesn't matter, or, the first chip on the block, so to speak, they will eventually open up and talk about what's going on if they think that you're genuinely wanting to know. So I would say start with that. At the school level, of course, you can always, as a parent, request an S team, which is a support team that will kind of is a multidisciplinary team that comes together to talk about your student. Usually parents are included in that. If you ask for one, parents are always included in that. Sometimes schools have them without a parent if the school is the one who's concerned about things. And then we have an additional parent meeting after that once we've kind of talked it out if we decide there's something that needs to be looked at further. But a parent can always call an S team. All they have to do is ask a school for one. And that's a whole group of people that come together. It might be the nurse, the social worker, the teachers, administrators, school psychologist, might be the school counselor, behavior specialist, whoever's involved with that child. And we come together to look at that child as a whole child. Like, how are they doing all the way around? Is there been a change in behavior? Has there been a change in academics? Has there been a change in health? And then we start to investigate that a little bit further. And then we make recommendations. For instance, maybe we think the child just needs some community resources and that would help out. And then the social worker might get involved and talk with the family about some outside therapeutic interventions or some outside behavioral support, those sorts of things. But if it's further than that, if immediately, of course, was for suicide ideation, that's a whole different track. We immediately do a suicide assessment, even if we think there's a possibility that it needs to be looked at. But for other types of interventions, we take a little more time and dig a little deeper. And then after the S team, then evaluate or IEP meeting, if they already are a special ed student, then we look at, do they need academic testing? Do we need to look at emotional testing? Do we need to get some outside resources? So when we start looking at that, that ball starts rolling, and that turns into kind of a different process. And parents are made aware of that, involved in that. But like I said, a parent at any time can call one of those. So if you have suspicions about your child or you're concerned about your child, I would immediately reach out, talk with the school social worker, the school counselor, or if you want the whole team to come together, call for an S team.
Now, we have a question in the comment section, and it sounds like you're going to say call the S team. A lot of great information there, but specifically, the question is, what do you do with a child who refuses to go to school because of depression and anxiety, has extreme panic attacks, etc.? So far, this year is going good, but the parent never knows.
Well, and that's a big issue because obviously truancy is it's illegal. So you get into a whole nother ball of wax when you start looking at absenteeism, because you have court interventions that start getting involved once a child has missed too many days of school. And so it kind of takes a little bit of a different avenue. But I would say first reach out to your school social worker or whoever you have involved in the school, your school counselor. I don't know if you have an attendance person in your school, who that would be. And I would reach out to them first, but then make sure that it's not just dealt with from a legal standpoint, that it's not just a punitive action. Because if there are barriers such as depression, anxiety, things like that, causing that child not to come to school, then those things need to be looked at. There needs to be an S team, or there needs to be an IEP meeting or an M team meeting if they're already special ed. And we need to look at those kinds of things and see what barriers can we remove. Sometimes we can do things like, maybe if they're having trouble walking in the hallway in the middle of change of class, we can change the time that child changes classes so they can go in the hallway when there's not 300 other people in that hall. Or we can give them, start them out in the day, maybe with a teacher that they're super connected to, so it's not as much anxiety to start the school day. There can be things that can be done, and that multidisciplinary team will look at that. So either an M team or S team, depending on whether your child is regular ed or special ed, would probably be a big advantage because you want to try to nip that in the bud, so to speak, as fast as possible, because you also could then have punitive repercussions in the end if that's not dealt with. So I would say always to start, as quickly as possible. As you start noticing those things, start trying to deal with those immediately. Don't wait until you've gotten the court notice to show up at court, right? You don't want to wait until that point, because at that point, then some of that's out of your hands as to what the school can and can't do to try to accommodate that student.
Oh, thank you so much. That's it. It sounds like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and a stitch in time saves nine. It's a little bit of folksy wisdom there, but you're absolutely right. If we wait until there's all these other people involved, it becomes much harder to get to the core component. For so many reasons that we probably don't have time to delve into here. So definitely getting ahead of it is very smart. Thank you so much for that question, and of course for getting ahead of it. As our viewer said, it hasn't been a problem yet this year, but they want to be ready. So So you're following the instructions already. Suzanne, our crowd is awesome today. Thank you so much. So this is another COVID related question. But it's not, right? How has going back to school for students and families been different this year? And please don't say because of COVID. Like what specifically has been different for them?
Well, I think the kids have been super anxious and excited about going back to school because a lot of them weren't at school last year. A lot of them missed out on their social interactions with their friends and their teachers. And I mean, I was at an open house at one of my schools, and I mean, the kids were just running up so excited, hugging their teachers, so glad to be back. So I think that for kids, that anticipation and hope has been more so than ever this year because of the lack of or the lack of routine we had last year. So I think for kids that has been the case. I think for some high schoolers that may not be true. There may be some high schoolers that are struggling a little bit more with going back because they've missed those peer interactions, and now maybe their peers went while they were still online and they've missed the connection, or some of their friends have made new friends and now they feel a little bit of anxiety about having to go back and face that. So I've seen that as a reality in some of our high schools. But I think that the biggest issue for parents has been that there's still that fear and anxiety, right? Like now COVID's picking back up. What's going to happen with my kids? Am I going to have to teach them from home? Are they going to be virtual? Are there going to be masks? Are they not going to be masks? Is my kid going to get sick? So there's been a lot of that, as well as parents whose kids are going back now. And there's the anxiety of, okay, now my kid didn't get those 8 credits they were supposed to get last year. And will they ever be able to graduate on time? Or now they missed all of mainly 3rd grade. Are they going to be behind in reading? So there's been a lot more anxiety, I think, on the parent standpoint. And what I would say to parents is kids pick up on that. So try really hard I know it's hard to say, keep that to yourself, because I don't want you to keep it to yourself, but share that with adults without kids hearing some of that, I think, because kids then pick up on it. And then all of a sudden they start having anxiety about coming back into the classroom. I think for school staff, it's been weird this year. There's been, usually when we go back to school at the beginning of the year, there's this huge focus on test scores and graduation rate and absenteeism rate and all of these statistics, right? And we're trying to meet all these goals and hit all these statistical platforms that have been set for us. But the interesting thing about last year and this year is really when we started back to school, we've been talking about things like connectedness and social emotional learning platforms and trying to help kids make those social connections, which we've never had to really think about before, right? I mean, usually schools are trying to stop kids from having too many social interactions, right? Like stop hanging out in the hall and talking to your friends and get to class on time. And now I've seen schools that are literally carving out time for students to have those peer interactions, which has been a first, I think, for a lot of school systems in Tennessee. And I have a high school that's happening in. Like they're giving them an hour for lunch and setting up special things that can happen during that time so they can interact with one another in a productive way. So that's something that's never really happened before. There's been a whole lot more focus on that social emotional piece, on trying to get those kids connected, build those relationships with kids, pick up on changes in behavior, dealing with anxiety and depression, and things that, they were kind of like asides in the past, right? Like, we wanted to deal with those things, but that was like secondary to the fact that we need their academic success. And now the focus is totally switched to, we need their mental health. We need them to have positive mental health. We need them to have, those positive relationships, those social interactions. We need them to be whole humans, not just great test scores, because we can't get test scores if they're not whole humans. And so I think that change has really come about due to COVID. And I think, like I said, we've always known that, but it was still, there's been so much, because of course the almighty dollar speaks and funding is where it's at. And when you're getting funding based upon those statistics, then those statistics are what the platforms you're trying to reach, right? Because, great. It's great to have all these social emotional things going on, but we've got to have X number of people graduate, X number of people with this test score. We've got to raise our reading levels to here and our math levels to there. But I think now we've started to really realize that there are more important things. Not that those things don't need to happen, but in order to get to those things, it's kind of like that whole hierarchy of needs things. If you're not meeting these basic needs that kids have, They can't get to the mental state to be able to open their mind to learn new information. And so if they don't have those coping skills, then they're having too much missed time in a classroom. They're having too much absenteeism. They're having, these suicidal ideations, and we're losing kids permanently sometimes, that could be avoided just by dealing with some of those issues first.
Thank you so much. Now, you've answered a lot about what social workers are doing to meet the emotional and physical needs for students, but what about the rest of the school staff? How are school staff responding to the emotional and physical needs?
I mean that across the board. I didn't mean that to sound like it was just social workers. Okay. Social workers have known that forever, but what's happening different this year is across the board, everyone's getting trained on those things. We're looking at those positive behavior interventions. We're looking at those social emotional learning things. And so it's happening all the way from administration trickling all the way down. It's not just the social workers who've been preaching this or the school counselors who've been preaching this forever. It's now coming from the top down. And so that trickle down theory is helping us get that across to everyone.
That is absolutely wonderful. Let's you touched on this a little bit, but let's do a deeper dive. How can parents make this year a smoother transition for their children, aside from as you said, not freaking them out? And it's understandable.
Stay positive.
Stay calm.
I really think that staying vigilant too and monitoring your child, like I said before, really knowing those signs of distress, making sure your child is not exhibiting those signs of distress, and then reaching out for help. I mean, there's tons of help out there that is right at your fingertips through the school systems. If they don't know to offer it to you unless they know you need it. So I would say that would help. But staying positive with your kids, being involved in what's happening with your kids, ask your kids every day to walk you through their school day. What did you learn today? Oh, you went to math class first. What did you learn in math? Oh, you went to reading. What did you learn in reading? So that they see that you're involved and that you are invested in their education. It'll make a huge difference in their feeling about school. I think if you get a caregiver assessment, I know my school systems do those, and I think statewide across the state that many of the school systems have been doing caregiver assessments. If you get one of those, please answer it. Send it back to the school so the school knows if you have any needs. It's a great way. It kind of gets the ball rolling. Then someone will reach out to you to talk to you about those things, whether it's as simple as, hey, I need a shoe ticket, or I need a clothing card, or I need some assistance with rent, or I'm homeless and I need a place to stay, or I need help with electricity, or whatever, or even I feel like my kid's falling behind in math or in reading, or struggling in social studies, or isn't getting along well with teacher that they have in third block, or, whatever the comment is, or whatever the situation is, we want to deal with that. Especially if they're being, if you feel like there's some other students that are giving your student a hard time. We see that sometimes with the LGBTQ plus communities. Sometimes we see that with racism situations. We see that with just regular kids who, oh, well, he's the person who took my girlfriend last year. Whatever those issues are, if you see that your child is starting to struggle with some of those things, bring it to administration, bring it to the school, so that we can address those things right from the get-go and they don't turn into something bigger. And then I think your child will have a good, successful year. I think if you show them that you're interested in their education and you feel like there's some value in their education, then kids will start taking it, they'll feel like their education is valuable too. And you set the expectations as the parent. And when you set that bar, that's what they try to achieve. So if you set the bar low, they're not going to go much higher. If you put no ceiling to it, you're going to be amazed at what you can get out of your kids. So I would say that makes the transition a whole lot easier if you're just involved in their school and have open communication with their school staff. It'll be a better year for you and for your kids.
Oh, Suzanne, thank you so much. Now, I know you touched on this a little bit with our question from the audience, but how should parents pursue getting help for their children within the school system if they need assistance?
Right. I would say, pick up that phone, call the school, ask to speak to the school social worker or the school counselor or the administrator, depending upon, what the needs are that you have, and get that ball rolling. All you have to do is ask, and there are all kinds of systems in place within the school system to get you the things that you need. And like I said, the whole job of the school social workers and even of school counselors is to remove those barriers. So if you have a barrier as a family, or your student has a barrier, we want those removed. And we'll dig deep till we figure out exactly what it is and try to fix that so that your kid can be as successful as any other kid in that building.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have another question from the comments section. Deborah Wyatt says, it's frustrating to know that virtual is not an option in our state, and her state is Tennessee. What will happen to our kids if they have to quarantine again?
Okay, well, first, I want to back up and address the situation about virtual. Some school systems have put virtual schools in. They're separate schools. I know in my school system, there's a virtual school, and kids had to enroll in that school. They can't just enroll now. They had to enroll ahead, just like they were going to, go enroll in any other school. But there is a virtual school. The other thing I would say is that, of course, if schools get to the point where COVID numbers are high, you may see that reinstate some, or you may see a different option come onto the front. School systems will have to adjust to that if numbers reach that level. You also, as a parent, always have the option to put your child in a virtual school. There are lots of virtual schools. Just make sure that if you do that on your own, and that's paying for a virtual school, if you decide you want to go that route, make sure that you choose one that is accredited, so that if they gain credits or they take classes through those virtual schools, when they come back into their public school system, that their academic gains will be acknowledged. Because I'd hate to see anyone pay for school for their child, and I've seen it happen before, and then that school that they went to was not an accredited school, and so when they came back into the state school would not accept their credits or their grades. Every school system publishes a list of those accredited programs. So they're up there for you as a parent. And as a parent, it's your option always to pull your kids out and homeschool them. There's usually a homeschool program even through each individual school district. As long as you have a high school diploma, you can homeschool your kids for free through that program. And then there are lots of programs you can pay for. If you don't have that background and you want them to do an online school, there are many options you can choose if you want to pay for that. But like I said, school systems that are public, at some point, if it gets to the point where our numbers are too high for us to continue on in the building, they will provide, I would assume, some sort of virtual opportunity for those kids, like they did last year.
Thank you so much. And then I know that the second part of the question was what will happen if they have to quarantine again. I don't know if this is I know that's sort of predicting the future, but do we know the impact on younger children? I mean, I think high schoolers are probably going to fare better, but what about our kindergartners, our first, second, third, fourth, and fifth graders? One of the things that I think about is, what about the age that you learn to read? I don't know that I could have learned to read virtually. And we haven't even touched on a learning disability or a learning challenge yet, where you need even extra help. I know you don't know the impact because we're not in the future yet, but from a social worker's perspective, what are you all talking about or thinking about in order to catch folks up?
Well, I think that obviously everyone thinks the impact will be negative, right? Like no one is thinking that COVID helped our children learn more academically. So I think what you will see is that eventually when those numbers come out, and those numbers will, they're usually about 3 to 5 years in the future when we start to see what that impact really looks like. And we can actually put a number to it, and statistically we can put a number to it. So you'll see, eventually all that information will come out, and we will have that information. We currently already have that information. It's just not all been computed and farmed back out to everyone yet. I think we will start to see, and over the next few years, we will see kids who will have some academic deficits. School systems are going to try to bridge as many of those gaps as they can, right? Because it hurts schools, and I say this to parents all the time, and I think parents are shocked by this. When kids don't do well, school systems suffer, right? Because we get less funding, we get bad report cards. We get sometimes schools reconstituted because people are not meeting those test scores. We get slapped on the wrist and get fined. If we have kids that are not coming to school because in the beginning of the year they were on a roll and we got paid for those kids, and then we didn't educate them, so now we got to give money back to the federal government and the state governments. So there's a huge push in the school systems to try to get those kids to graduate, to try to get those kids as much knowledge as we can get them so they can do well on test scores. So don't think that it's only coming from the family aspect that there going to be some negative impact. I do think, however, that schools are adjusting. Like I know even colleges are adjusting to what high school students could or couldn't take or do. ACT scores, they're giving them lots more leeway on things than they did in the past because a lot of kids couldn't take the ACT or they couldn't, they only got to take it once where most kids had gotten to take it 6 times or, whatever. So there's been some of that. I know that schools have put in place a whole lot of things like online in the building to try to help kids catch up on credits who are high schoolers so that they'll have enough credits to graduate. So you will see the school system also trying to make strides to help your student because it hurts them. They're going to lose funding if your child, and they're going to look bad if your child does poorly, right? So there's going to be a lot of makeup. I would say try to get in on any of that you can. If you have a kid who's a high schooler, pick up summer school faster than you possibly can. If your kid has missed out on some credits, try to get those credits back. Do a lot of credit recovery so that those kids who can move at their own pace. Some school systems have alternative school settings where kids can go and do the work in the classroom, but also online so they can get them quicker than they were in a whole, like instead of taking a whole semester to get your Algebra 1 credit, you can maybe get Algebra 1 and show proof that your kid is having to be quarantined. We're not giving out that information this year. Never have we given out that information due to HIPAA, but this year it's a little bit different. Schools are not doing contact tracing. Just the health department is doing contact tracing. So fewer people in the school are going to know that that's why your kid is out. But I would say stay in touch with your kids' teachers. I think they're giving them 2 days to get makeup work together so that they can make up that work while they're out or have that makeup work to make up, shortly after they come back. So they're going to try to work with you in any way that they can so those kids can get those grades and make that academic progress. So I would just say again, stay in touch with your school system. Make sure they know why they're out. Make sure they get that makeup work to them. You may have to go by the school and pick it up, or you may have to have them send it to them, email it to them, or in whatever way you have to do that. But school systems will, I think, try to be working with families in every way that they can so that those kids don't miss that instruction.
Suzanne, thank you so much. We're pretty much out of questions and almost out of time. If there's any questions, you have about 30 seconds to get them into the chat. Thank you so much for everybody that participated this week. And Suzanne, thank you. You've answered so many questions. I do have one more that just popped in anonymously. And the question is, if you have a child that is using drugs or alcohol, how do you know if it's a behavioral problem or if it's a mental health issue? I can imagine that would be difficult to tease out.
Right. And I would say that would probably take an alcohol and drug assessment to make sure. Often they go hand in hand, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. A lot of times we find kids that are having mental health issues or even having just some coping issues, and they use alcohol or drugs as their coping method. So often that's what you're going to find. I would say immediately I would reach out and try to get help. You want to get them off the alcohol and drugs, but then you also need extended help past that. You need some therapy or things to get to the root of the problem. Why did you think this was an appropriate way to handle it? Why was this behavior your go-to behavior to deal with whatever situation it was? Because you don't want that to escalate either and get to the point where it becomes an even bigger gap to try to bridge. I would say don't let that go untreated. Try to get help for your student as fast as possible. Your child, probably needs some additional assistance. So you'll need to reach out to people in the area. And I would look for people who have experience when you're looking at therapeutic help. I would look for people who have alcohol and drug credentials so they can help you specifically with that. Not every therapist is trained to deal with that. So I would definitely make sure that whatever therapist you choose has some experience in that realm.
Suzanne, thank you so much. I know that I feel like I say this a lot. You know, so many people want to know the answer when it comes to mental health and addiction. People want to know the answers before they talk to a professional. We
Right.
don't have this in physical health. We just suspect that something is wrong with ourselves, our children, our loved ones. We're like, oh, that looks bad. Off to a doctor. In mental health, it's like that seems bad. Well, until I figure out what it is, I'm not going to talk to any. But no, I the suspecting is enough. And much like in physical health, right? If you get to the social worker or the therapist, the doctor, the whomever, and they're like, well, yeah, your child is definitely acting up. I think that you need to do X. Okay, then you know. I'm or if it's something very serious, you'll be glad that you went. I like to get that message out, and I imagine you as a social worker are probably also curious as to why people think they need to do your job before they see you.
Right. Well, I would also say, when you're looking at alcohol and drugs and things like that, you also, you want to get to it before it becomes a legal issue. That's what we find often is a lot of times it's not dealt with until somebody gets picked up by the police or they're high and they do something they normally would never do. And then they have court involvement and it becomes a whole big tangled web that sometimes they can never get out from underneath. So I would say, again, just like everything else in mental health, the quicker you try to deal with it, the better result you're going to have in the end. So the faster you can sort of grab that monkey by the tail, the better off you'll be. And the easier it will be for your child to get help and to overcome some of the issues that they're dealing with.
I absolutely love that message. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. You were
Thank
wonderful.
you
Do
for
you have
having
any
me.
last words?
Oh, well, I mean, I would just say to everyone across the state, this is a year for grace again. We did that last year. Please be patient with your school system. Please be patient with your children. Please be patient with the staff because they've gone through just as much trauma as everybody else. And just try to remember that when we deal with each other. Hopefully, the school system will deal with you with that same level of respect and just respect one another because it's been a hard year for everyone. But together, we can make it through this just like we did last year. We made it through. We'll make it through another year.
We can do it. Once again, thank you so much for being here. It is really appreciated. And to all of our viewers, okay, first and foremost, join NAMI Tennessee's email list so that you know all of the cool things that are going on. Things like our upcoming conference. I've been popping it up on the screen over the last hour, but I'm going to now say it in words. The virtual NAMI Tennessee conference is September 23rd and 24th. There's going to be a CIT panel. There's just going to be so much to do. Learn more at namitn.org, and you can also see our list of super cool speakers. And also, we want to give a huge plug to NAMI Basics. If you are a parent or a caregiver or have a child under the age of 18 who has mental illness and you want to learn some skills, want to know more, want to understand more, NAMI Basics is definitely a very cool class for you. You can learn more about it at namitn.org/NAMI-basics. And obviously, you can also email us at info@namitn.org. And you'd know all that if, yeah, you know what I'm going to say, if you were on the NAMI Tennessee email list. At some point, I'm going to get a toaster. That's really how I feel about it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to our very super cool guest. And we will see you next Monday at 2 Central, 3 Eastern. So thank you. Let's wave goodbye.